Good morning, everyone. We'll just give those joining a couple more seconds before we start. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Cameron Byrne, General Manager of Partnerships and Memberships here at the AFA. In partnership with ALUCA, the Australian Life Insurance and Underwriting Claims Association, this webinar aims to shine the light on how financial advisors can support their clients' rehabilitation and recovery at claim time. We will be reviewing how we define rehabilitation in life insurance and show how rehabilitation can benefit clients. We'll talk through common concerns and queries we hear from our financial advisors at claims time and show some real life experiences of how insurers, rehabilitation and financial advisors can work together. We're excited to be joined by Rob Vitnell from AFRM, representing the experience of this from the perspective of a financial advisor. I'd just like to introduce our speakers today. Catherine Zayman, Senior Rehabilitation Consultant from Zurich. Catherine has worked in the life insurance industry across claims and rehabilitation for 9 years, with a further 4 years experience in clinical work. Catherine is passionate about occupational rehabilitation and supporting our customers in their well-being, work readiness and return to work, goals across their recovery and health journey. Catherine also obtained a bachelor's and a master's degree in chiropractic science in 2009 and a master's degree in rehabilitation counselling in 2019. Hussein El Khanza, recovery specialist, TAL. Huss joined ALUCA subgroup in 2020. He has over 15 years experience in rehabilitation within the insurance industry across a number of life insurance companies. Over the years, he has developed expertise in supporting customers on their journey back to health and recovery. Huss is a qualified physiotherapist with over 18 years of experience and continues physiotherapy consultations. And last but not least, Rob Vitnell, Managing Director, AFRM. Rob joined AFRM in 2008. He has been in the financial services sector since 2001, including both paraplanning and advisor roles in financial planning and financial risk management. Rob holds a Diploma of Financial Services, Financial Planning and a Bachelor of Commerce. Rob is a proud member of the AFA and meets the standards set by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission for the financial services industry in RG 146. Before we begin, I'd just like to cover off on some webinar housekeeping. Today's webinar will provide you 1 hour of CPD. The AFA will send details of this within the next week. As a webinar attendee, you will remain on mute throughout the session. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Please use the Zoom Q&A function and not the chat function. I'd now like to hand over to Catherine, Huss and Rob to take you on this exciting webinar. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. We're part of ALUCA, and it's a not-for-profit organisation with about 1,800 members, and our job is to raise the professional standard of the industry through building connections, education and development. And having a look at the AFA, it seems like we both have a similar mission in our respective professions. Today, we'd like to build our working relationship with you, give you some insight into what we do as rehab consultants and hopefully give you a few takeaways. So quickly onto the agenda, and Cameron just mentioned it briefly before, but we're just going to run through what is rehab in life insurance, why do we offer rehab assistance to clients, some common concerns we hear from advisors, run through a few case studies to see rehab in action, and then we'll hear from Rob Vitnell with some Q&A at the end. So first up, what is rehab? So rehab is helping people get back to meaningful parts of their life following an illness or injury. It's the implementation of services that improve well-being function and, where possible, return to work. It involves collaboration with clients and treatment providers. And it involves rehab consultants and claims assessors from the insurer's side. And at times when we need to refer externally, we'll refer to rehab providers who can, I guess, have a more personal touch, being in person and on the ground with the client. So on to why we offer rehab. And I guess looking at work, it's because work is good for our health. It's because work is part of our identity and purpose. work impacts our family and social life, and of course, work pays the bills. But to sort of back all of this up, we've got some research that we'd like to share with you on these following slides. So why is work good for us? Because it does have an impact on our mental health in a positive or a negative way, depending on if we're at work or not. And as you can see there, people that have been off work for extended periods of time, there's a 6 times greater risk of committing suicide. As well as that, there's a 2 to 3 times greater risk of developing any kind of mental illness if being out of the workforce. But as well as that, work can have a protective component to it, and employment is a significant protective factor for improving the mental health and reducing disability from psychiatric illness. And moving on to physical health, as you can see here, they did an analogy, and being off work for more than 6 months is equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes every day for 10 years. Further to that, there's a 2 to 3 times increased risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease, high blood pressure, chest infections, poorer general health overall, and an increased chance of having a long-term illness. Moving on to, I guess, the purpose and the identity that work gives us. As we all know, we partly define ourselves in society by our job, and we know that if we're meeting people for the first time, one of the first questions that often gets asked is, what do you do for a living? And similarly, when we come home at the end of the day, one of the first questions that we get asked is, how was your day? And in terms of work giving us a purpose and identity, as you can see on the quote here from the research, they're talking about the role of being a provider and a contributor, not just at work, but in the home. And people start to lose their identity when they're out of the workforce, and even start to perceive themselves as a burden. And moving on to family and the social effects of work. Being off work obviously affects the health of the individual that's not working, but there's also some research to show that it can affect the other important people around us as well. And a quote I'd like to read out here is that in a family environment, having one or both parents out of work has been shown to affect the physical and mental health of their children. So it does reach far and wide in terms of its effect. Moving on to job performance and the effect it has on our performance and confidence. Just like people that have played sport, that there's match fitness and the term use it or lose it, and it's a similar kind of thing when it comes to work. I guess we can all think about having been on a long holiday, been on long service leave, maternity leave, career breaks. Often on those first couple of days, you may not feel as sharp, you may not feel as confident, you may not remember everything on your first couple of days back. And quoting what they've got here, they've said, like athletics, work involves skills, attitudes, habits that are built up over the years, and staying in training. Even if this involves shorter hours or different duties than usual, it can make the transition back to health and regular employment easier to manage and more successful. So we've obviously talked a little bit about the research about how work can be beneficial and also its effect on our health if we are out of work. But if we're going to help people return to work, how do we give them the best chance of success? And that brings us to the point of early intervention. And in short, the longer someone is off work, the lower the chance of them ever returning to work. And you can see the curve on the screen there, which has a few bullet points about probability of returning to work at certain dates. And as you can see, being off work for about 4 weeks or so, the chance of ever getting back to work is 70%. And when it gets to about 45 days off work, it becomes a 50% coin flip situation in terms of the probability of returning. And as you can see, at 70 days, it's down to 35%, or let's call it about a third. And if you stretch the graph out a little further towards 300 days to a year, the probability of returning to work for having about a year off is about 1%. So And looking at this curve and the probability of returning, that's why we like to promote the concept of early intervention and getting in and trying to help people as soon as we practically can. And further to that, I mean, if we think about the stock standard insurance policy that we all see around with the 30-day waiting period, if we look at a 30-day waiting period and we also look at being off work for 45 days and having a 50% chance of not returning to work, it gives us some things to think about in terms of how we can best help our customers and get in early. And finally, returning to work can actually promote health. But should we wait until someone is fully healthy before returning to work, or help them return to work while they're still recovering? I guess it's a bit of a chicken or the egg scenario, if you like. And if I read this quote out from the research to you, the researchers concluded that most of the improvement in people's health was directly caused by re-employment, and not that returning to work because people were healthier. So they were essentially saying, don't wait until people are fully healthy before initiating return to work. Look at opportunities to engage them in some kind of work as part of their recovery. And I guess this supports the notion of early intervention and obviously the partial disability benefit in the policies. Now, where did all this research come from, and what's it all for? Now, back in 2010, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians produced an initiative called the Health Benefits of Good Work. It was to raise awareness for not only doctors, but employers, patients, and the broader community about this exact point, which this initiative was based on compelling Australasian and international evidence that good work is beneficial to people's health and well-being, and that long-term work absence, work disability, and unemployment generally have a negative effect on health and well-being. As well as that, they also had reflected on their proficiency and ability to incorporate return to work into their treatment. And one of the things that they noted was that some GPs asserted that their role was to provide support and management of health-related issues, and managing long-term worklessness lay outside of their role. So I guess knowing this, they understood they could do more, and they're open to improving in this regard. And I guess that's something that us as rehab consultants feel that we could assist in the process by providing information to the doctors that we obtain through our discussions with the customer, through rehab providers, obviously with the client and the other stakeholders being involved. And giving this information to the doctors allows them to get a bigger perspective of the situation, know what the employment environment is like, for example, and help the GP make the best decision for the client as they make a recovery. And moving on to Catherine.
Thanks, Huss. Okay, so jumping straight into it, I wanted to take you through some of the concerns we've heard from financial advisors around why you feel engaging your client in rehab services might not be helpful for that individual or for their income protection claim. Some or all of these concerns may resonate with you and your experiences. But what we really hope to achieve from this webinar is to offer you a little bit of a different perspective, show you that the goals that we may have for your client around their recovery, around their return to work, are more than likely aligned to what you would like for your client too. Okay, so some of the concerns or misconceptions we have here. Why is the insurer offering rehab services to my client when they haven't been paid yet or the claim is yet to be accepted? There's no benefit in having my client have direct contact with the insurer. It's just more people for them to deal with. The rehab provider is going to be guided by the insurer's needs rather than what's best for my client. My client's already actively engaged in a treatment plan, so rehab support seems unnecessary. And my client needs to be fully recovered to participate in rehabilitation and a return to work. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, Huss. Okay, so the first point, offering rehab when the client hasn't been paid. Look, this concern does come up a lot, and we can appreciate from your point of view, the number one focus at claims lodgement time is getting that claim accepted and the money into the hands of your client. We know that some claims are accepted quickly, others can take much longer to be paid for various reasons. And we can wholeheartedly acknowledge that many advisors just don't want to consider rehab support for their client until they start being paid. To offer a different perspective on this, Huss talked about the health benefits of good work and that early intervention research. And from the rehab team's perspective, we're wanting to offer the right rehab service at the right time. This may well mean that we offer a wellness or return to work service to your client within the waiting period or before the claim's been accepted, so we can start that journey to recovery. And look, I would say that most clients, they don't need rehab in the waiting period. We're not going to suggest someone still in hospital or needing lengthy or complex treatment is going to be suitable. A lot of people are simply not well enough for us to be offering rehab support early in the diagnosis. But where it could be useful for is, for example, if you have a client who may have had an ankle fracture 6 weeks ago, they have a 90-day wait, so a further 6 weeks until the end of that waiting period. Once those initial claim forms come through and the treating doctor reports, we might identify that that client would benefit from an exercise program as the treaters certified them as having a partial work capacity. We get them started on a 3-month exercise program that then allows them to build up function to help them transition back to partial duties by the time that the benefits have commenced. It's a really good outcome for the client who gets rehab assistance in a timely way. And look, even better if that rehab service can play a part in helping that client get back to work partially. The claim will continue to be assessed by the claims team in the background. Okay, so moving on to the second concern, there's no benefit from having direct contact with the insurer. I'd really like to start this point by acknowledging the very important role that you play as financial advisors in advocating for your clients. We know that you provide invaluable support to your client by helping them really navigate that medical and financial complexities of a claim, whilst also offering at the same time that emotional support. We do recognize that your client values your opinions, they trust your advice, and would really welcome your participation in any conversations you'd like to have with us about your client's needs. From there, ideally, would like to actually build on that and have direct contact with your client to understand their circumstances, treatment and return to work goals directly from them. We do think it's important that we're able to build a relationship with them, so we can explain exactly what support services we identify as being suitable. If you'd prefer to be involved in the initial phone call we make to your client, as well as any ongoing communication, we're always happy to facilitate this for you. The other positive piece I wanted to mention here is that if the rehab team have direct contact with your client, it gives rehab that ability to collaborate with all the stakeholders, particularly with their treaters. And this, we find, can actually reduce the need for the client to have to provide either frequent medical reports or treating doctor reports, or sometimes even undergoing independent medical examinations. Okay, so moving on to the next two concerns. The rehab provider is guided by the insurer and not the client, and my client's already engaged in treatment. So look, while the insurer is responsible for engaging and overseeing a rehab program, our providers are independent contractors. The rehab provider's role is to work in partnership with your client. You might be aware that the client can generally opt in or out of rehab. Occupational rehab is largely not compulsory in life insurance. To that point, we therefore want the client's buy-in. We want them to be genuinely engaged in the process so they can start to take some ownership and return to work. We know that most people with injuries and illness, look, they do recover in a predictable manner. They tend to return to work quickly with the support of appropriate and evidence-based treatment. Most people we find don't need rehab, which is great. But for others, that path back to recovery, back to return to work can often get complicated. Evidence suggests that it's rarely just due to the medical condition at this stage, but rather the social, psychological, and economic factors that are tied into this. So through rehab, we're typically looking at the biological, the psychological, and social aspects of the individual, how these factors into play, and what additional strategies beyond the treatment can be utilized to support that client's recovery. Our rehab programs are designed to work in conjunction with the treatment, and it can really complement and strengthen the existing treatment plan. Okay, so moving on to the last concern, my client needs to be fully recovered to participate in rehab. So for a long time, the narrative around recovery post-injury or illness was often that the individual needed complete rest, needed complete disconnection from activity and work in order to recover. Huss has shared why an individual doesn't need to be 100% recovered before they return to work. You might be interested in the Australian Bureau of Stats. It suggests over 1 million Australians who have a disability are currently actively participating in the workforce. So that's more than 50% of people with a disability. What we know is that maintaining activity, a good routine, engagement in the community, and being at work, when medically appropriate, of course, are all really important during recovery. Okay, we'll just move to the next slide, Huss. Okay, so now we're going to talk you through 2 case studies that highlight some of the rehab supports we can offer and how we can all work together to support the client. These cases are real people who had claims with us and went through the rehab and claims process. Okay, so the first study we have here is Nathan. He's a 40-year-old CEO of a marketing company. For the past year, he's been feeling increased pressure at work and generally feeling burnt out. After discussing with his GP, he's obtained a referral to a psychologist. He's commenced with psych treatment. However, 2 months later, unfortunately, he's resigned from his role and he's now been certified as totally disabled for at least 6 months. His advisor submitted an IP claim on his behalf, which has been accepted with an age 65 benefit. His advisor doesn't want the insurer to have direct contact with Nathan, as he feels that communication with too many stakeholders is really just going to stress Nathan out. Nathan's mental health symptoms appear to have worsened over the last month or so, and he spends a lot of time by himself, nor does he have many friends or family around him. Next slide. Okay, so some of the main factors impacting his recovery are that Nathan's symptoms have not been improving. He doesn't appear to have a clear direction moving forward with his recovery and return to work. He has a poor support network, and now that he's resigned from his role, he's experiencing a loss of confidence and lacking that social contact he once had with his colleagues. Some of the advisor's concerns with Nathan's claim: the advisor recognises that Nathan doesn't seem to be getting better, that Nathan may be triggered and put under more stress if he needs to speak to his case manager or rehab consultant. And the advisor feels due to a previous negative experience, rehab probably is not going to be helpful. Next slide. Okay, so what was the journey? After we facilitated a 4-way conversation between Nathan, the advisor, the case manager, and the rehab consultant, the outcome was that Nathan agreed that rehab participation might be helpful for him. We referred to a rehab provider for an initial needs assessment, utilizing that biopsychosocial approach, as well as engaging the treaters to understand the treatment goals and possible return to work timeframes. The GP at that point suggested Nathan increase the frequency of which he saw a psychologist to really help with that symptom management. The provider and Nathan developed a wellness and recovery plan over 3 months, focusing on really building out that healthy routine, social connections, exercise, and developing some vocational goals, including upskilling in a leadership support program. The outcome was that Nathan was able to successfully complete the leadership support training. He engaged really proactively in the wellness program and increased the frequency of which he saw a psychologist to help manage those symptoms. Amazingly, and look, I'll admit this doesn't often happen, but what occurred was that Nathan was able to actually recommence discussions with his former employer. He already had a good relationship, so he was able to start talking back with the employer around possible return to work options. And he actually negotiated a partial return to work in a head of sales role. There was a lot of work in the background to help this happen, including the rehab provider facilitating several workplace meetings with the employer and the client to develop a bit of a return to work strategy that suited both parties, both the client and employer, as well as several treater case conferences to discuss Nathan's capacity and how this translated to an alternative role. Through that ongoing work-related coaching piece, the client was able to upgrade to working full-time in 3 months. So all in all, we thought it was a good example of how the insurer and the advisor can work well together to advocate for the client's recovery, and fully acknowledging he wasn't 100% recovered from his mental health condition. However, he was able to transition back to work in line with that medical capacity at the time. So I'll hand over to Huss to walk us through the second case study now.
Cool, thank you. Now for case 2, we have Paolo, who's a 47-year-old shift supervisor in manufacturing within the building industries, and he's had this job for over 10 years. He was diagnosed with follicular cancer, a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and 2 months later he ceased work and underwent chemotherapy. Initial medical certificate said 3 months TD. He then lodged an income protection claim through the help of his advisor, and the benefit was till age 65. Paolo's employer was supportive of him and wanted him back, but because of the nature of the work and the way they operate, they weren't able to identify or offer any suitable duties. So they said, hey, we'll take you back, but we just need to make sure that you're capable of doing all duties before we can do that. And his financial advisor advised us to have direct contact with them, with the financial advisor, rather than the client, to allow Paolo to focus on his recovery. Quickly, just want to go through some of the biopsychosocial factors. So obviously the primary diagnosis here is cancer, but as you can see visually on the screen, there's a lot of other things going on in this person's situation. So as you can see, side effects of treatment, obviously with chemotherapy, nausea and fatigue. He was also having, that was treatment of the primary condition, but there was no secondary allied health treatments to address anything else that was going on. There was, the client was given an unclear prognosis from his treating doctor, and therefore the doctor was a bit guarded about what the future held, and as a result, this started to impact his mental well-being. Regarding social supports, he didn't really have much support at home, and he found the workplace as something that he got a lot out of. He enjoyed working with his colleagues, and he became withdrawn because that was not a part of his life at this point. And as I mentioned before, suitable duties not being available, so it's really an all or nothing approach. So having looked at this case and seeing what was going on, the insurer had some ideas on what they could do to help this guy, but they thought, let's have a chat to the advisor first, because obviously to respect what the advisor's interests were in terms of communication. So the insurer booked a chat with the advisor to share the ideas and hear the concerns. And when it came to no direct contact with the insurer, look, the insurer explained what had been uncovered in with the limited information that we had on file at the time, and they explained that a further detailed phone call with the customer or client would build on this and explore those potential issues a little further to give us a better idea of how to assist this person. The advisor also figured that I understand the benefits of rehab, but wouldn't it be better if it was facilitated once he made a return to work? And in terms of day one, what can we do on the first day to make it easy for him? And But we did talk a little bit about obviously not offering, the offer of suitable duties not being there. And as well as that, outside of the primary treatment, what other, and managing his fatigue, all it was rest. And it was like, well, what else could be done to help build this person's capacity while they're recovering from what they've been through? And as well as that, the advisor obviously wanted to maintain contact with the client throughout. And the insurer said, well, of course, whether it's through the insurer or through a rehab provider, that the financial advisor can be kept in the loop all the way, so they know what's going on. And so when they have future discussions with their client, they can add some of that in. And the advisor was also quite in tune with what was going on, and noted Paolo's mental health, and thought, well, I'm just concerned about what's going to happen if too many people get involved. And the insurer mentioned, look, as it appears that both of us have picked up on this person has, the developing of some mental health symptoms, but it seems like in terms of his overall treatment plan, we can't see anything happening. So the insurer advised, look, either the insurer themselves, or if we refer to a rehab provider, they can pass that information on to the treating doctor to help the GP make a decision in that respect. Look, and following that discussion, the advisor was very open and very reasonable with what the insurer had to discuss, knew that the best intentions of the client were there, and agreed for direct contact and if there was any rehab services as well. So I guess onto the journey. This person was engaged in some rehab assistance in the form of a 12-week cancer support program. And that's sort of geared at health coaching, symptom management, understanding what's going on at what certain time during this person's treatment and recovery, and also was able to suggest psychological support and help raise that with the GP. And as a result, a mental health care plan was issued. As well as that, to manage the person's energy levels, fatigue, and building their function, they participated in an exercise physiology program. And this was, as you'd expect, tailored to people who are going through or who are recovering from cancer. So it was a graded approach, and it was a way of building this person's capacity over the coming months. And in terms of the outcome, it improved his mood. He was able to take control of his situation and understand what was going on, and that improved his mental well-being. He demonstrated an improvement in his functional capacity and improvements in his fatigue, and incorporating exercise into his daily life. And as a result, within about 4 months, he was able to return to work in his full duties as that supervisor. And I guess we thought this was a particularly good outcome. And I guess, like most people that we see, there's often many other factors beyond the primary medical condition at play. And having the support and collaboration of the client and the financial advisor helped to enable the services to be implemented and achieve the outcome that was made. Now I'm just going to quickly share, and when you guys get the slide pack in a couple of days, you can read this in a bit more detail, but we've included some examples of client feedback that we've all received over time, and just some phrases I want to sort of point out as we go through before we get to Rob is, one of the clients was talking about they appreciated the help that was offered. They were impressed with the practical guidance that the rehab provider was able to give. They were also impressed that the rehab provider understood what they were going through in their unique situation. They appreciated the rehab provider was knowledgeable and empathetic during this time. And one of them even sung the praises of the rehab provider to their oncologist. So I thought there was some quite good things to hear from all of that. So what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Rob, and he's going to share some things with us about his and his clients' experiences with rehab.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute as well, give the advisor's perspective, which is there are some similarities, but probably some differences as well to some of those messages, but it's about talking about them and being as positive as we can. Bit about my background, so Managing Director of Afrm, also Director and Founder of Afrm Claims Advocacy. So our mission is very much about claims. We are specialists in that space. We have managed over $250 million worth of claims payments to our clients. So we've managed quite a few claims, in fact, over 500 claims to our clients. And currently, I believe we have over 100 ongoing claims. So we manage a lot in terms of AFRM in-house clients, but we're also quite often just an outsourced service to non-clients as well on a fee-for-service basis. So we've got quite a strong background in claims. But coming from the advice perspective, our philosophy and approach to claims, our view is that good advice leads to good claims outcomes. So we start with that premise. We're always trying to achieve certainty of outcome in the event of a claim. And we're not only just looking at the best financial outcomes, but we are really focused on the best health outcomes for clients as well. As advisors of our clients, we're in a really privileged position, and that's the position that we take towards our clients, in that it's a very, very personal relationship with our clients. Often I say to people that we might know more than a client's spouse, or sometimes more than their GP. So we're in a very, very privileged position that's based on trust, on understanding, compassion, and support. In our claims meetings, I mentioned this to the guys the other day, commonly it's 5 minutes of form filling and paperwork completion, and then 55 minutes of talking and listening and supporting and sometimes counselling. Our clients are going through the worst time in their life. They've experienced a sickness or an injury, a disabling event, maybe a death in the family. And so we come back to that very privileged position that we hold with clients, and that is that trusted advisor position. It's a very, very personal relationship. And so when we're having those very personal conversations with clients, we do start to look through the lens of what the guys mentioned before, that bio, psycho, social, all those different aspects of a client's life. It's not just about the insurance financial claim itself, but it's a conversation about how they're feeling, what's happening in their lives, how it's impacting on their work, no doubt, but also their family, their routines, their day-to-day life. And we start to sort of unpack a lot of what's actually really happening in a client's life. It's not just about the insurance contract claim itself. It's about what are their health circumstances at that point in time? What are the health outcomes that they're looking for? And because we deeply care about our clients, we start to have those conversations whereby we're naturally sort of working towards, well, we'll take care of the claim over here in terms of the financial aspect. And that's always that's the primary concern when we're dealing with our clients. But then it's also about, well, what does wellness look like for you? You know, how do you feel and what are you looking to achieve, et cetera? And so we start to naturally gravitate towards those wellness outcomes and plans towards how do we return you to wellness, and ultimately, how do we return you to work? Because as the guy said before, work is actually good for your health. It gives you purpose and meaning and routine and habit, and it pays the bills, etc. So it's a really good thing that we start to have those conversations and implant those sort of messages towards our clients. So that's very much a big part of what we do as claims specialists, as advocates for the client. And I should actually point out very clearly that our role is to advocate for the client. We don't work for the insurer, we work for the client. But I think when we're having these conversations, we can't help but to then unpack, well, what does good look like? And perhaps we need to engage and collaborate with the insurer to see what they can provide in terms of not just the financial outcomes of the claim, but what other services can they provide? And we often talk to the insurers early on in the piece around what services they can provide. We've got endless examples. In fact, the first example on the case study in the presentation was eerily similar to one of mine that I've had quite recently. But just a couple of quick examples. A a young female client in Melbourne during the height of the pandemic a couple of years ago, suffering mental health, no surprise, lockdown at home, etc. It was a very, very difficult time. We were able to get the insurer to provide an exercise physiologist service to the client, which the client was able to engage with and got some great benefits out of, that in fact led to better health, of course, but then actually to having the confidence to be motivated and energetic, and ended up getting a new job, etc., and really achieving some great things in life. So that's, I mean, a great example. In that situation, though, it was so important as the advisor to be able to deliver the message. I think that's what's really important here, is that we're actually on the side of the client. So if we can deliver these messages in terms of recovery and rehab, I think it's well received, or it's received a lot better by the client. So collaborating and engaging the advisor and the insurer in consultation with the treating doctors as well, I think can be net positive for the client. Another really unfortunate story, but a good outcome nonetheless, was a client of mine. The father passed away, unfortunately, late 40s, married, some teenage children. The children were really struggling, the death of their father. One in particular was self-harming, which is just an awful situation. But again, I was able to engage with the insurer, who provided counselling and psychology services to the children of the actual life insured. So, and it was very helpful for them. You know, they've recovered and rebounded really well. And again, just another service provided by the insurer, delivered, I guess, in a way by the advisor. So it's about that collaborative teamwork, led to a great outcome. Another couple of examples, in fact, one similar to the case study that you raised there before, I think it's Catherine. A client of mine, we were able to get vocational support for in terms of business coaching and also resume building as well, something really, really specific. They finished up working during their disablement, but we were able to work with the insurer to get some training and coaching around resume building, and they were able to actually go back to work in another role. So just another service that was provided, but delivered through the advisor. And I think that's really important. We're in that privileged position. We're trusted by the client. We can deliver those really positive messages. So there's some great examples. I think that the important message that I've got is that it's the delivery of the message, and for all to be on the same page and to be really positive about it. Back to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Rob. That was really helpful to hear around, you know, the principles, the values, how you approach your clients' claims, particularly around, you know, supporting the best health outcomes for your client. And I agree. I think we're all insurers and advisors are aligned with those goals. And yeah, love to hear, you know, this is just music to our ears when you talk about early intervention and getting engaged early, or when medically appropriate, as early as possible. So that's really great to hear. Just a question. I really wanted to hear if you could share any feedback with us around anything you may have heard from your clients who have engaged in a rehab service, any positive feedback, negative or constructive feedback. Just keen to hear what your clients are actually saying about rehab services within their policies.
Just thinking about one of the examples I mentioned there before, the first one of the young female in Melbourne a couple of years ago. I freely admit that she was pretty negative towards insurers to begin with. I think she had bad previous experiences. But, you know, the world was turned upside down during COVID. So I guess, you know, sort of people started to maybe change their frames of reference a little bit. I was able to talk to her in that trusted advisor role position that I'm in, and to just sort of change that mindset a little bit in terms of, well, you know, you're really struggling here at the moment, you know, with your mental health. I wonder whether some intervention can help you here. I mean, I'm your advocate. I'm on your side. The insurers, you know, they're paying the claim. They did pay the claim. That was great. That was the primary concern, was to get paid, of course. We were able to achieve that. So that was the financial outcome. But then it was, well, you know, we need to get on with life and we need to be positive here. And how do we get back to just some kind of happy place? You know, that's sort of where our conversations went. And so, you know, when the insurer was able to provide the exercise physiologist, at first she was sort of like a bit, oh, I don't know about this, you know, what are they trying to do here? And I said, look, just roll with it. Like, you don't, it's not compulsory, you don't have to do it, it's not mandatory, you're not forced to do it all the time or when you don't feel like it. But like, I think the net benefit is there. And so she did engage, and she did a few sessions. They were online because she was locked down. And she was pleasantly surprised. She came back to me later and said, you know, I was pretty negative to begin with, but I actually felt better afterwards. So, you know, why wouldn't I do it? And so I think the key there for me was to actually get the client engaged. It was to get them past that point of, you know, the roadblock or the barrier or the trepidation. And once they were engaged, I haven't really got much negative feedback from after that point, I suppose. So it's about, again, delivering the message. And it's not always right for all clients. I know you made that point before, but not all clients are going to need rehab or recovery services nor want it. But if they can get engaged, the feedback's normally quite positive.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I guess the question I've got is, do you have any tips or ideas on when and how you begin that discussion with the client about, you know, if rehab could be suitable for them?
Well, sort of goes back to the point I was making before around, you know, we have those claims meetings, you know, we deal with the financial aspects, the form filling, and we you know, that's pretty process driven, I suppose. And then because we're in that privileged role, we start to sort of delve into those sort of more personal aspects of life, and just like a normal friend conversation almost. And once we sort of are in that space, you can't help but to sort of think through the lens of that biopsychosocial, even though it might not be so formal in your mind. Like, I mean, just those areas, I mean, you talk about the disabling issue. I mean, you talk about how they're thinking and feeling, and then, you know, you talk about their work and family and friends and all those things. And so when you start to sort of talk about those issues, it's sort of, quite often the clients will just say things to you, and you sort of react to, well, you're listening, and you sort of, you're consultative, I suppose. And then, I mean, the way that we approach things, it's, well, I wonder what could be really helpful in this situation. I wonder if I spoke to the insurer offline, I wonder what services they might have in that space that maybe then I could have a conversation to the client about, and maybe I can deliver it to them and then start to go down that path of the rehab and recovery. So that's pretty early on. I mean, that starts when we're filling out forms. It doesn't always happen straight away, of course, but we deeply care about our clients, so you can't help but sort of flow into that sort of that space pretty early on in the conversation.
Thank you. I'm just mindful of time, but I do have one last question, Rob, I would love to ask you. And it's really, if you could share any insights around the certain triggers that you may see with your clients that get you thinking perhaps rehab is suitable for this person, or certain flags or concerns that might pop up that you think, oh, they're not quite recovering where I feel they are.
Sure.
Yeah, could you share anything around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my experience, I quite often find it starts in the mental health space quite often, and you can kind of gauge from the way clients are thinking and feeling that, you know, if they're down, for instance, you just can't help but be compassionate and supportive and think to yourself, well, I wonder how I can help them. Often I'm less concerned when you're talking about a broken ankle or something like that. I mean, normally that's generally sort of more black and white, and there's a time frame to it, and you know that they're going to recover, and well, you certainly hope they're going to recover, and if they're genuine, I mean, we're talking about genuine claims here, we're not talking about people, you know, trying to take a lend, but genuine clients, I find it's more in the mental health space, but I think you touched on it earlier, often musculoskeletal disabilities, I mean, that can be the primary, but then it leads into secondary being the mental health. And I think if we start to see sort of a bit of a roller coaster there, or a bit of a slippery slope into that secondary piece, quite often that sort of flags, a trigger in our mind that, gosh, I wonder whether we need to sort of intervene here a little bit. And actually quite often we provide services to our clients, not just the insurer. We actually have a psychology service that we engage with, our advice practice that we will offer to clients from time to time in terms of trying to be helpful and help them. So we're kind of thinking through that lens from the beginning. So we don't need a lot of triggers. It's just, whether we feel like it's warranted through our experience, and whether we think, they're on a downward sort of slippery slope, or, whether they're sort of on the right path.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Rob. I think we're aligned with that. I will hand back to Cam now to field any questions from the audience we may have.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So just looking, a couple of questions have come through. I'm just reading them off my other monitor. You talked about a return to work being good for someone's recovery and mental health, but what if it's the pre-disability workplace that has caused or contributed to the mental health condition in this case? How do you approach rehabilitation for these clients?
Okay, thank you for that. Now, that's a pretty good call out, and I guess like we look at every mental health condition in the same way in terms of how did this condition develop and what are the stressors. So seeking to identify what the stressors or what factors cause this person to feel this way is really important. And if those factors are in the workplace, identify whether through the GP and the psychologist, can a return to work be achieved through discussion and working through with these employers, or is it a better option to look at a way to avoid that? And I guess for us, taking time to understand that gives us the best opportunity to offer the right type of psychological rehab services following that.
Yeah, I would just add,
No,
jump in, Rob? Just going to add, look, we know work-related stress, it's recognized globally as one of the major OH&S factors. We know that, well, more often than not, my experience is that someone claiming for a mental health condition, there's usually some part or some aspect of that condition that can be attributed in some way to their work. But with us mentioning around the triggers of work, so usually we see common triggers of the work exacerbating someone's mental health. Could be that the demands of their role may exceed that person's capabilities. There could be a conflict with a colleague or the line manager, or there's that constant risk of job security or changes to their work environment. But one of the considerations when there is a work-related issue, if there is a concurrent workers' comp claim, how that claim is actually being played out, can be tricky to engage a client in rehab support through that income protection claim when there is a work cover claim pending. So it's just a further consideration for us. But look, if there's no complicating factors and we can identify what that work-related trigger is, then sometimes looking at pathways back to that pre-disability employer is the first step. So we might look at suitable duties, we might look at moving that client into a different team or a different work area to sort of avoid that trigger if it's, say, a colleague or a line manager. We find that part of that process, the rehab provider can play a really crucial role in providing that work-related coaching and mentoring, not just to that client, but also to the line manager, to people overseeing the return to work plan, because that's sometimes the line manager and the people that client's reporting to often have no idea how to manage that mental health condition. So we find it's numerous stakeholders involved. But look, failing all of that, sometimes the only way forward for that client is to actually move to a new workplace if we can't remove those triggers, and medically the treaters support a return back to that same employer role is not going to be appropriate. Sorry, Rob, I know you wanted to add something.
My answer is not dissimilar. One of the examples I mentioned there before was actually a bullying scenario in the workplace. that led to a mental health income protection claim. With the advisor, with us being involved, the advisor, we were able to intervene early. We identified the issue. I went to the insurer and we were able to get vocational support like really, really early on, right at the start of the claim, whereby they were getting business sort of mentoring and also the resume building piece as well. And they were able to go on and get a new role external to that workplace. So I guess the advisor's involvement, delivering the message, getting involved early led to a really good outcome as quickly as possible for that client.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. Here's a good one, and I think you touched on workers' compensation a minute ago. How do you work collaboratively where there is another insurer involved, such as another life insurer or workers' compensation insurer?
That is a good question. And look, I would be the first to admit that I feel like a lot of work still needs to be done between insurers. We don't collaborate as well as what we should, and we don't communicate between insurers as well as probably what we could do. But in the instance, if say a client may have two different income protection policies with two different insurers, look, the first piece from a rehab point of view, generally whoever's on risk first will be the insurer that ultimately oversees that rehab program and generally picks up the bill, so to speak, for the rehab benefits. But look, how we approach it is to still work collaboratively together. So, you know, I would just pick up the phone, I'd speak to the rehab consultant like Huss from Tau, I'd speak to him around medically, what information does he have on file? We'll compare notes. We'll look at what the client's motivation and what their goals are around recovery and return to work, and we'll just collaborate closely. I would say there's differences when that client has a work cover claim or workers' compensation claim with a work cover insurer. Look, we don't tend to get involved so much whilst a client is engaging in treatment through a work cover file. As we know, insurers or life insurers can't fund treatment under the National Health Act and under the Life Insurance Act. So we know the work cover files, they tend to get, you know, quite robust treatment. So we would tend to leave them until such time that the work cover file is winding down, and then we can offer something within our scope, such as an exercise program or some OC rehab, whether that's work related or ergonomics, etc. Rob or Huss, did you want to add?
Yeah, look, just following on what you said there, the main thing for me is make sure that rehab is appropriate and do it once. You wouldn't want two different insurers doing, you know, offering exercise programs or initial needs assessments and stuff. So even with workers' comp claims that are active, there sometimes can be opportunities to be in touch with them, because if we from our end have identified things within their presentation that could benefit from rehab, but from knowing what workers' comp are doing, we're not seeing it. It's something that we can raise with them and understand if that's in their strategy, if that's in the client's interest, and if not, then we can you know, get in touch with the client and see what they'd be interested in.
Another question that's come through. I have a client who is currently involved in exercise physiology and physio, which they are paying for privately to help with rehab. Can the insurer pick up the bill for these services? So it sounds like it's a client that's paying or getting additional treatment on top of what the insurer is providing. Is that something, can the insurer pick up the bill for these services?
Look, I would point out, as I mentioned before, that insurers can't fund treatment. So any sort of physio, hospital care, surgery, where the primary focus is to support someone to return to health, is classed as treatment. Rehab under life insurance is about returning someone to that functional capacity. Our goals are generally tied into OC rehab or workplace rehab. So I would say absolutely there's scope for the insurer to perhaps fund an exercise physiology program with an exercise physiologist, so long as those goals are tied into functional capacity and ideally upgrading to transition back to work. But there's further considerations for us as life insurers. Obviously, we've got LICOP, we've got processes and procedures in place. Most insurers, to reduce our risks, we have a provider of panel, like a panel of providers, I should say, that are understand exactly what a life insurer's needs are and understand how to operate under LICOP. So I would say the short answer is no, but it's more complicated and would really welcome a conversation with the advisor around where our scope lies and how we can best support that client in their rehab and return to work goals.
Thanks, Catherine. Just looking at the time, we're under a minute to go or just about to hit 12 o'clock. So on behalf of the AFA and our members, I'd like to thank Catherine, Rob and Huss for your insights today. It's really good to hear the work that, you're all doing on behalf of clients out there that are going through tough times with insurance claims. And once again, thanks to you for participating and sharing your stories with our members.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.